It's absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of today's show, let's talk with the shooting guard position, a position that clearly has lost a lot of luster over the years, but still adds a lot of value to your fantasy basketball team. Because the shooting guards, yes, they're not the big point getters, but they are ultimately the facilitators of the real life teams and ultimately can add a lot of consistency and balance to your fantasy basketball team. So without further ado, let's talk about them. Now, a lot of these guys lay in the Eastern Conference, and a lot of them really are developing their games more in a team-centric manner, while others really are having to carry their teams as well. Some of the Western Conference guys, particularly, because that's the point of the shooting guard. The shooting guard can either be a guy who can be your main scorer any given night, or really molds into what the team represents. And two of these guys, at the very least, I know, are representative of that kind of mindset. But some other two guys are more of the scoring type, so that you may be more inclined to look at them rather than these other two guys I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about them, though, in their own right. Starting off with a guy in number 4 in Donovan Mitchell, who I really like as one of the more balanced shooting guards in the NBA. 23.1, 4.6, 4.6 averages, 40.8 fantasy points per game. So as you can see, this shooting guard position is a position where you see these higher splits between these players, but not necessarily as high as, say, a Luka at the point guard position or an SGA at the point guard position. And we'll see it a lot with the small forwards as well in the next segment. But potentially outside of, the big positions in the power forwards and centers, the shooting guard position has the most variance I saw out of all the points per game averages. But Donovan Mitchell is one of the steadiest hands in the NBA at the shooting guard position. He is someone who doesn't buy into all the noise. He truly buys into being one of the vocal leaders of this Cleveland Cavaliers team as they sit at number 1 in the Eastern Conference. And it's really down to buying into what they can do well at. Their inside-outside game can be impeccable. They can rely on the youth of Darius Garland as well at this position. But ultimately, it comes down to Donovan Mitchell's experience and his poise in this environment where you find yourself sitting atop the Eastern Conference and a lot of noise is surrounding you from the outside. And Donovan Mitchell has really controlled this team and really shown he can be the leader of a franchise looking to get back to its best from like the mid-2010s and really challenge for that Eastern Conference title and maybe even an NBA championship yet again. So kudos to Donovan Mitchell for really expanding his game, buying into the culture and identity of this Cleveland Cavaliers team and truly being a vocal leader. But on the other hand, you get guys like Devin Booker who really are interesting case study because the Phoenix Suns, when they're all together, are a team that combine the most talent on a court in the NBA this season. But because of injuries, whether it be to Durant, whether it be to Booker himself, whether it be to Bradley Beal, who just came back from injury, scored 25 off the bench, I feel like this Phoenix Suns team has not yet reached its peak. And until then, I feel like players like the Bookers and Beals and Durants of the world have to carry them when they're there and when they're available, most importantly. And Devin Booker has been one of the better aspects of this team as well. He has been someone who has been a lifelong Phoenix Sun, has seen a lot of success, a lot of failure within this organization, but still has remained a steady presence in the NBA. He kind of goes a little bit underrated at certain times, but still an elite athlete in his own right. 24.7, 6.5, 3.7 stat line, 42.3 fantasy points per game average. And I do feel like as time goes on, this Suns team will begin to coalesce. Maybe a little bit too late to get into the upper reaches of the Western Conference standings, but still in the play-in tournament race. But I do feel that once this team gets healthy, it's going to be interesting to see how all of these players coalesce, how they fit into certain positions, how they work together, because I'm really interested especially in who's going to be the prime ball handler as well. Is it going to be Kevin Durant? Is it going to be someone like Bradley Beal, who hasn't necessarily been a prime facilitator that much for Phoenix in his tenure here? Will it be ultimately Devin Booker, who I feel like is the best in terms of facilitation in this team? So it's really going to come down to the health of the Phoenix Suns and what role Devin Booker will play when there's a fully healthy roster there. So that's why I feel like he's someone who's a little bit more mysterious, but still adds a lot of value as someone who might more often than not score a lot of fantasy points for you. Then let's talk about another player in the Eastern Conference realm who ultimately is the definition of a team player at this current moment in time, the ultimate prototype of a shooting guard who plays unselfishly, Jaylen Brown, one of my favorite players in the entire NBA, just because of his ability to really mold into a team culture. One of the leaders of this Boston Celtics team as they go for their second straight NBA championship. And I really feel like at this current moment in time, he might just be the best shooting guard in the NBA. I know it's a little bit crazy, but he brings that versatility to the plate, both offensively and defensively, that power, that aggression offensively, and then being able to guard multiple positions on the defensive end. Really been playing selfless basketball at this point in his career. 24.6, 4.6, and 6 is his stat line, 42 fantasy points per game. Undoubtedly someone who, like I said, can be the prime ball scorer this season. He's had moments where he's had crazy numbers, like 40-point outburst on any given night, and he's perfectly capable of it. But I feel like when Jaylen Brown is at his best is when he's being selfless, dishing out assists, really willing to sacrifice his best aspects for the overall outlook of this team. And that's why they're such a difficult team to beat, and that's why they're going to be a tough out in the Eastern Conference. Yes, they're getting a lot of teams' best shots, and ultimately sometimes they've fallen short in these games. But having a guy like Jaylen Brown at the shooting guard position, being so willing to cede a lot of ball handling duties, cede a lot of responsibilities in order to really help the greater good of this basketball team is really admirable, and not a lot of players do that. And that's something I'm talking about with this position that you don't necessarily see with a lot of other positions. The shooting guard position is such a conundrum because you have these teams in the Eastern Conference, like the Cavs, like the Celtics, like some of these other teams, the Hawks maybe, say Miami, who rely a lot on team basketball. And I feel like Jaylen Brown is prototypical and representative of what these teams can achieve. But there are also teams that are forced to rely a lot more on their shooting guards, like the Phoenix Suns, and like what Devin Booker has on his plate at this current moment in time in the Western Conference. And so it's that ultimate decision that you have to make in order to decide, do you want balance in your roster that really balances out your front court, or do you really want a guy of the Devin Booker realm and this next guy we'll be talking about who can really score a lot of points because of their team situation? It's really a nice analysis to look at here, because I really respect the shooting guard position in basketball. They don't get as many plaudits as other positions, but ultimately it is a position that has to be really examined very closely if you want to get it right, because it is very difficult to describe which ways you can go and which paths you can take. But ultimately, let's talk about this last guy who falls into the latter camp here of the Western Conference teams who are kind of having to lean on their shooting guards in these desperate situations. But James Harden has been admirable this season. 45.1 fantasy points per game, 20.9, 6.1, 7.8 stat line. And I feel like James Harden is someone who has gotten a lot of flack in recent years, but really has stepped up to the plate in terms of offering this LA Clippers team, who no one thought was going to be competitive this year, a different look. And I feel like because of the absence of Kawhi Leonard for this long stretch of the season, I feel like James Harden has gone a little bit under the radar of a lot of people, underappreciated in terms of how this Clippers team looks, because this Clippers team really has kind of developed this team ethos, and I feel like that's been the best part of their growth maturity in this trying season for them, and the reason why they sit firmly in the play-in picture. But ultimately, James Harden has to have been someone who a lot of people were saying, oh, we can't lead this team if Kawhi's out for this period of time. But he has. And it's not necessarily the prettiest numbers. You'll see 21.9, 6.1, 7.8 stat line, like I said. But it is a stat line that's indicative of James Harden buying into this Clippers team and not giving up on it. And I feel like if this team does reach the play-in, it's down to James Harden doing something that we haven't really seen from him, stepping up and maintaining that number one option in the chaotic situation like in LA, the point where they're a competitive basketball team. And once Kawhi Leonard comes back, I think he'll be a very nice compliment, and we're going to talk about Kawhi in our next segment. So I feel like the Clippers team is one of those interesting teams to monitor from a fantasy perspective, especially with the shooting guard and small forward position, which we're going to talk about, because they feel like they're in a dire situation because of the play of these unsung heroes for them. They're in a good position this season. And so that's why I feel like once Kawhi Leonard comes back, look for James Harden to continue this level of productivity. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, because it is an interesting position group to look at. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking about the small forward position, kind of getting into the more important guys amongst your fantasy basketball squad. So let me know what you think about the shooting guard position. When we come back, we'll be talking small forwards after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts